The days after the storm felt different at St. Mary's Hospital. The air seemed lighter, the halls brighter, even though nothing visible had changed. People moved with quiet optimism as if they, too, had survived something. Dr. Alexander Hayes went back to work, as if nothing extraordinary had happened. He walked the same corridors, greeted the same patients, and signed the same charts. But those who looked closely noticed subtle differences. He smiled more often now, not the polite smile of a professional, but the kind that reached his eyes. He stayed longer with patients, listened a little deeper, laughed a little easier. The boy he had saved, Daniel, became a symbol of hope for everyone in the hospital. His recovery was slow, but steady. Nurses said that when Dr. Hayes visited the boy's room, his heart monitor always sped up just a little, as if the boy's body remembered the hands that had brought him back. Outside of the hospital, life began to unfold quietly for Alex. He started taking long walks by the ocean in the early mornings, when the town was still asleep. The waves became his companions, restless, unpredictable, yet grounding. Sometimes, he would stand at the pier, breathing in the cold salt air, feeling both small and infinite at once. He no longer thought of Emily every day, and that realization frightened him at first. For so long, his grief had been his identity, his shadow, his punishment. Letting it fade felt like betrayal. But as the weeks passed, he understood that forgetting was not the same as losing. He had carried her memory through his pain, and now, by choosing to live again, he was honoring her in a way he never had before. In quiet moments, he would still see her in his mind, not the way she looked at the end, but the way she had been, bright-eyed, laughing, full of life. Sometimes he imagined her standing beside him in the hospital corridors, watching as he worked, her smile soft and approving. In those moments, the ache that once consumed him was replaced by warmth, the feeling of gratitude that love, even lost, can still save us. As winter turned to spring, Grayhaven blossomed again. The days grew longer, and the town's seaside air filled with laughter and the sound of gulls. Alex found himself invited to more dinners, more gatherings. He was no longer the mysterious stranger from the city. He had become part of the town, someone people trusted, someone they depended on. Olivia Carter remained his closest companion. Their bond deepened quietly, naturally, without labels or expectations. They spent their breaks in the garden behind the hospital, talking about small things, not medicine, not the past, but the present. It was in those unremarkable moments that Alex found peace, the kind of peace that comes not from the absence of pain, but from learning to live with it. One evening, just before sunset, he stood on the hospital's rooftop terrace. The sea stretched endlessly before him, shimmering gold under the fading light. The wind carried the scent of salt and blooming lilacs from the gardens below. For the first time, he felt a sense of completion, not because everything was perfect, but because it didn't have to be. Life was fragile. People left. Storms came and went. But what mattered was the courage to keep showing up, to keep caring, to keep choosing light even when the darkness felt easier. Below him, the town lights flickered on one by one, like tiny stars waking from sleep. Somewhere down the hall, laughter echoed, nurses teasing each other, the comforting rhythm of normal life. And as the last colors of the sunset disappeared into the sea, Dr. Alexander Hayes closed his eyes and let himself smile. He had once believed that redemption meant erasing the past. Now he understood that it meant carrying it gently, with grace into the future. The storm was over. And for the first time in years, he was not just surviving. He was living. Summer came gently to Grayhaven. The sea softened to shades of blue and silver, the streets filled with the scent of salt and jasmine, and the hospital windows glowed warm with evening light. For the first time in years, St. Mary's Hospital felt alive in a way that mirrored the people within it. Dr. Alexander Hayes had settled into a rhythm that felt almost like peace. He still arrived before sunrise, coffee in hand, and left long after the halls had emptied, but something had changed. His steps no longer carried the weight of escape, instead, they moved with purpose. He had become part of the town's pulse, a quiet constant, as familiar as the tide itself. The townspeople had stopped calling him the handsome doctor. Now, they called him Dr. Hayes, with warmth, with gratitude, with affection that ran deeper than admiration. To the patients, he was safety. To the nurses, he was steadiness. And to Olivia Carter, he was something else entirely, though neither of them dared to name it. Their connection had grown in silence. It wasn't a story of sudden confessions or dramatic gestures. It was slower, subtler, built through shared glances in long corridors, through tired smiles at dawn, through the quiet trust that comes from standing side by side in the face of fear. Outside of work, they had begun to share small pieces of life. Coffee on Sunday mornings. Walks along the pier at dusk. Laughter that echoed faintly against the sea walls. They never spoke of the past anymore. They didn't need to. The silence between them was no longer haunted, it was peaceful. As the days grew longer, Hayes found himself teaching young interns, something he had once sworn he would never do again. He spoke softly, never raising his voice, always patient. He taught them not only where to cut, or how to heal, but how to see, to look at patients as whole stories, not just symptoms. He had learned, through pain and loss, that medicine was not just about saving lives, but about witnessing them. In the quiet moments between surgeries, he would sometimes pause and watch the sunlight move across the operating room, sharp, sterile light softened by time. The hospital no longer felt like a place of ghosts. It was a place of beginnings. Olivia noticed the change before he did. The tension that had once followed him like a shadow had lifted. There was light in his eyes now, calm and unforced. He had forgiven himself, even if he never said the words aloud. And in that quiet forgiveness, something gentle began to grow: hope. One afternoon, at the end of a long summer day, the hospital fell into a rare calm. No emergencies, no sirens, no rushing footsteps, only the soft hum of machines and the distant sound of waves. Hayes stepped outside, walking toward the hospital garden. The air smelled of lavender and sea salt. The sky was deep gold, the horizon almost too bright to look at. He sat on one of the benches, the same one where months ago he had stood watching the storm clear. The garden was full now, blooming, alive, tended by the very nurses and doctors who had once only passed through it. Somewhere in the distance, he could hear Olivia laughing, that quiet, unguarded laugh he had come to recognize as his favorite sound in the world. He closed his eyes and let the moment sink in, the hum of life around him, the rhythm of peace after years of noise. For so long, he had been haunted by what he couldn't save. Now, he found strength in what he could still build. He no longer measured his worth by perfection, but by compassion. He no longer searched for redemption because, somewhere along the way, he had already found it. As the sun dipped below the horizon, the hospital lights flickered on, one by one, glowing softly against the darkening sky. Dr. Hayes stood, looking at the ocean one last time, before heading back inside. The night shift would begin soon, and there were still lives to tend to, still stories to honor. But this time, his steps were lighter. His heart was steady. He had learned that life doesn't end with loss, it renews itself quietly, patiently, like the tide that always finds its way back to shore. And somewhere within that endless rhythm, in the soft hum of summer and the pulse of the sea, the handsome doctor finally belonged. Time, as it always does, moved forward softly, without announcement. The summers came and went, and the ocean outside Grayhaven kept breathing in its endless rhythm, drawing the tides and returning them, as steady as a heartbeat. Years had passed since the night of the storm. The town had grown, the hospital had expanded, and new faces had filled the hallways, young doctors and nurses, eager and wide-eyed, just as Alex once was. Yet some things had remained the same. The old oak tree by the garden still bloomed every spring. The sea still whispered through the windows during night shifts. And Dr. Alexander Hayes still arrived early, long before the sun rose, greeting the day with quiet resolve. He was older now, not by much, but enough to carry the calmness that comes only with time and acceptance. His hair had begun to gray around the temples, and the lines near his eyes deepened when he smiled. But that smile had become his signature, steady, reassuring, real. Olivia Carter was still by his side. She had taken a position as head nurse, though everyone knew she was much more than that. Together, they had built something lasting, not just a hospital that healed bodies, but a place that healed people. A place where compassion mattered as much as knowledge. Their bond had never needed grand declarations. It had grown quietly, like ivy climbing a wall, steady, patient, unstoppable. There was love between them, but it was not the kind found in stories of youth and fire. It was gentler, rooted in trust, in years of shared mornings, in the small comfort of someone who simply stays. In the evenings, when the hospital grew silent and the ocean reflected the last light of dusk, they often walked through the garden together. The roses they had planted seasons ago bloomed wildly now, stretching toward the sun. Sometimes, they spoke about the day, the lives saved, the ones lost, the little miracles in between. Other times, they said nothing at all. Silence had become its own language between them. The memory of Emily no longer haunted Alex. It lived quietly within him, like a soft echo, a reminder of who he had been and who he had become. He often thought about how strange grief was, how it could destroy, and yet, over time, how it could also build. Without the pain, he might never have found Grayhaven. He might never have met Olivia. He might never have learned that healing does not erase the scar, it simply makes it bearable. One autumn evening, as the sky burned with orange and gold, Alex stood at the window of his office, watching the sea. He could see the reflection of the hospital lights in the glass, small, glowing points of life against the gathering dark. He realized then that the world he had once fled from had finally caught up with him, not to haunt him, but to complete him. He was no longer running. He was home. In that moment, a deep peace settled over him, not the fragile kind that can break with a single thought, but a steady, enduring calm. It was the peace of a man who had forgiven himself, who had loved and been loved, who had done what he could, and that was enough. As night fell, he turned off the light in his office and walked through the corridor one last time before leaving. The hospital hummed softly, monitors, voices, the quiet music of life continuing. He passed the room where Daniel, the boy from the storm, now volunteered during summer breaks, older, taller, full of laughter. He smiled, feeling a warmth that words could never capture. Outside, the air was cool and filled with the scent of sea salt and pine. The town stretched quietly below, lights flickering like distant stars. Olivia was waiting by the gate, a faint smile in her eyes. They walked together toward the shore, where the tide was rolling in under a silver moon. The waves whispered against the sand, and somewhere in the distance, a lighthouse shone its beam across the water, slow, steady, patient. Life, he thought, was like that light. It moves in circles, disappears for a while, then returns again and again, no matter how dark the night becomes. He stood there for a long time, listening to the sea, his heart quiet, his soul unburdened. The handsome doctor was no longer just a name or a story whispered by patients. He was a man who had learned to live fully, love deeply, and let go gently. And as the tide reached his feet, and the stars shimmered above the calm horizon, Alexander Hayes finally understood that miracles don't always happen in operating rooms. Sometimes, they happen in the simple act of staying, of choosing life, again and again, until it feels like home.